Hi everybody, my name is Tamara Keefe, and Haley Stratton and I will be presenting on the Colorado Department of Transportation's North I-25 EIS mitigation site at St. Vrain State Park. The purpose of the 2011 CDOT North I-25 EIS project was to identify and evaluate multimodal transportation improvements between the Fort Collins-Wellington area to Denver. The project was estimated to have an anticipated total of 16.10 acres of permanent impacts to waters of the U.S. The Corps permitted the project under a 404 individual permit in May 2013. The intent of the mitigation plan was to reestablish floodplain wetlands and native riparian habitat to mitigate for the impacts associated with the proposed 35-year build-out of the North I-25 EIS preferred alternative. The mitigation site is located at the St. Vrain State Park in the Town of Firestone in Weld County, northwest of the intersection of I-25 and State Highway 119. Mitigation was constructed up front prior to impacts occurring. The total of 23.9 acres of proposed enhancement were credited at a 4-to-1 ratio to equate to 5.98 acres of wetland mitigation credit. Combined with the 6 acres of proposed wetland creation credited at 1-to-1, the proposed mitigation areas were expected to yield a total of 11.98 acres of wetland mitigation credit. The mitigation sites involve 2 parcels of land within the project area, which are all managed by CPW, but one of the parcels is owned by the State Land Board. An interagency agreement between CDOT, CPW, and the State Land Board was put together for the purpose of having all parties fulfill the wetland mitigation commitments and requirements of the North I-25 EIS and the North I-25 Section 404 individual permit. The agreement set up a timeline for the construction, maintenance, and long-term management of the wetland mitigation site. The plan was to begin work in the fall of 2013. However, it was delayed until spring 2014 because of the September 2013 flood. The flood deposited sediment, washed away vegetation, and caused erosion along the Idaho Creek and the St. Vrain. The mitigation plans that were put together consisted of planned construction prior to the 2013 floods. Due to the amount of change the flooding caused to the area, plans were field fitted during construction. At Area 1, the St. Vrain Terrace site, 8 acres of enhancement included preserving existing wetlands and converting existing disturbed agricultural land to riparian shrubland, forest, and grassland habitat. And 6 acres of creation restoration was done, which included lowering the current surface ground elevation to be at or near groundwater level. At Area 2, the Idaho Creek site, the 15.98 acres of enhancement also included preserving existing wetlands and converting existing disturbed agricultural land to riparian shrubland, forest, and grassland habitat. The project was partially accepted pending a 2-year landscape maintenance period, which was completed in the spring of 2016. Some plants did not survive and were replaced under the landscape maintenance agreement. Additionally, shrubs were adversely affected by unauthorized mowing in 2016. 2016 is considered the first annual monitoring period due to the significant replanting effort to get the project into compliance with the conditions of the 404 permit. In 2017, the wetland areas appeared to be progressing towards meeting performance standards. However, the upland areas were generally showing more non-native and weed infestations. During the GPS survey in 2016 for as-built totals, it was determined there was a surplus of 1.42 acres of mitigation credits. However, due to the timing of the survey early in the site establishment, the as-built totals were revisited in 2018 as the sites matured. The 2018 GPS survey found that the St. Vrain Terrace site had a surplus of enhancement completed, which provided an additional 0.32 acres of mitigation. However, there was a decrease in the amount of enhancement completed at Idaho Creek and resulted in a shortage of 2.05 acres of mitigation. With a small surplus of 0.32 acres of mitigation at the St. Vrain Terrace site, there was a total shortage of 1.73 acres of mitigation, which equals 6.92 acres of additional acres to be enhanced at the 4:1 ratio. On February 12, 2019, a brainstorming session was held at CDOT to gather ideas on an adaptive management strategy to complete the enhancement needed. Each restoration site was discussed to determine what options were available for maintenance, enhancement, and/or creation. After the internal meeting with CDOT, an adaptive management plan was created for both sites. Once the plan was finalized, we met with St. Vrain Park Management and U.S. Army Corps to present the plan for approval. CDOT was able to secure additional funding to complete the adaptive management beginning in 2020. In January 2020, mapping of vegetation types throughout Idaho Creek was completed to document areas of existing wetlands, riparian areas, and upland floodplains in order to get a better idea of areas that could be enhanced. Also, neither the Idaho Creek site or the St. Vrain site has met the standard for having no more than 20% non-native species. Therefore, weed management is necessary in order for the sites to meet the standard in the future. The adaptive management for the St. Vrain Terrace and the Idaho Creek sites can be divided into two primary actions: maintenance and corrective.
An integrated weed management plan was drafted in April 2020, and a comprehensive non-native and noxious weed survey was completed on June 30th of 2020 at both sites. We also flew our drone over both sites, once prior to weed management, during weed management, and then once after weed management. This was all to obtain aerial information for base mapping and videography. Maintenance actions included using goats and then a follow-up herbicide treatment. So here we have a map of the St. Vrain Terrace site showing the results of the weed survey. So the most dominant species at this site were Canada thistle, common mullein, musk thistle, hoary cress, perennial pepperweed, and downy brome. Other observed weed species were field bindweed, common teasel, moth mullein, Russian knapweed, diffuse knapweed, Russian olive, and tamarisk. At the time of this June 2020 survey, there was approximately 7 acres of weeds throughout the 20-acre site, so about 35% of the site was covered in weeds. Another weed survey at the St. Vrain Terrace site will be completed summer 2021 to determine if weed coverage is decreasing or if the weed management plan needs to be adjusted in any way. So the dominant weed species at the Idaho Creek site included Canada thistle, perennial pepperweed, musk thistle, hoary cress, and downy brome. Other observed weed species included field bindweed, diffuse knapweed, and Russian olive. At the time of the June 2020 survey, there were approximately 8 acres of weeds throughout the 17-acre site, making about 47% weed coverage. Another weed survey will also be completed at the Idaho Creek site in the summer of 2021, again just to determine if the weed coverage is decreasing or if the weed management plan needs to be adjusted. Goats were brought to both of the mitigation sites in order to reduce size, density, and reproductive efficiency of the non-native and noxious weed populations. CDOT used goats from a local company called Mutton Mowers to graze each site. There was a total of 33 goats and 2 llamas, and they were at the sites for 52 days starting on July 13th of 2020. The goats were divided between the mitigation sites in order to work both locations simultaneously. Each site also had a llama to protect all the goats from any potential predators. Solar-powered electric fences were used to divide the sites into smaller pastures, so these pastures were grazed one at a time for an average of about 4 days. In these maps, you can see the pasture lines, and the first number is the pasture number. The second number after the dash is the amount of days that the goats remained in that pasture. The green layer is observed and recorded weeds from the 2020 weed survey. As far as preferences go, the goats definitely like alfalfa, curly dock, prickly lettuce, sweet clover, tree leaves, cattails even, and they would eat the Canada thistle. The goats did not, however, consume the milkweed, rushes, or sedges in any measurable quantities. So luckily the goats have totally been a hit with park visitors, as well as the park staff. They've been really receptive to us sticking some goats into the park as their resident weed whackers. While the goats worked each site, they accomplished a large amount of weed mitigation, soil disturbance, fertilization, and vegetation stimulation. Since this was our first year, improvements could be made for future grazing. The timing of the start of the grazing was approximately 3 to 4 weeks late. Most of our targeted species had actually already flowered and gone to seed, but the goats did strip the leaves and at least prevent a second flower. Following a significant amount of precipitation, thistle rosettes started growing in much higher densities at both sites. So it was determined that the best course of action would be to complete a fall herbicide treatment for thistle species and perennial pepperweed at both sites. Milestone was used to treat up to 10 acres at each mitigation site. And these sites were very densely populated with thistle, so given the extent of the weed coverage, it's likely additional weed management will be necessary this year in 2021. When comparing costs between these two methods of weed management, between herbicides and goats, the goats do end up being more expensive on a cost per acre basis. However, on this project, CDOT just thought it was more important to try another form of weed control that's less harmful to the environment while supporting a small local business. CDOT also recognized the opportunity in this project to conduct a study and definitely considered that. The option of comparing herbicide treatment at one site to goat treatment at the other site. However, unfortunately, there were just too many variables between the two sites that couldn't be controlled for, so that wasn't done.
In order for the corrective actions to be successful, it was decided that additional data needed to be collected at the Idaho Creek site. Therefore, the site was surveyed to determine the existing vegetation communities throughout the entire site. Soil samples were gathered to determine the best plants for the soil type, and water monitoring wells were also installed to obtain groundwater data. The planned enhancement at the Idaho Creek site includes 1.52 acres of enhanced existing wetlands, 3.14 acres of enhanced riparian area, and 2.28 acres of enhanced upland floodplain, which totals 6.94 acres of enhancement, which offsets the mitigation shortage. Water monitoring wells were installed within the Idaho Creek mitigation site to obtain additional groundwater data for plantings. There was a total of 8 wells installed throughout the mitigation site, and recordings were taken between April 1st, 2020 until August 29th, 2020. The data helped to determine the best locations for plantings, as well as the species of plants based on the preferred water regime of each species. Exact placement of plants was determined in the field during installation. Zone 1 is located in areas where groundwater is more consistently present, therefore wetland herbaceous species were planted in this zone. Willow species were planted in Zone 2, and Zone 3 contained riparian trees and shrubs. 10 four-wing saltbush plants were also experimentally transplanted from the berm to areas within the enhanced upland floodplain. If these plants are successful, additional transplants may be done for other areas. In order for the plantings to have a better chance of success, the containerized willows and cottonwoods were deep planted, approximately 4 inches deeper than the tops of their containers. An old roadbed in the enhanced upland floodplain area was also decompacted and roughened to a depth of 12 inches using a mini excavator. Amended with 500 pounds per acre of biosol, broadcast seeded with a combination of the CPW St. Vrain Park upland seed mix at 80% and riparian mix at 20%, and mulched with wood straw at approximately a 50% coverage. The 2020 Annual Mitigation Monitoring Report concluded that all but one of the performance standards have been met. We need to be below 20% of non-native species. CDOT has scheduled mutton mowers to come back in the spring before any flowering has occurred. Once the goats have grazed during the spring and summer, we'll follow up with an herbicide treatment in the fall. The weeds have been increasing each year, and in 2020 they were a big issue. The 2020 report marks the 5th formal monitoring report for the mitigation work. The individual permit requires 7 years of monitoring unless the site meets all conditions. We are confident that we are on track to meet the permit conditions by the 7th year, if not sooner. Thank you all for listening to our presentation, and please reach out if you have any questions or would like to learn more.